The doorbell rang just as we finished our spaghetti dinner. "I'll get it." Katie, my 12-year-old daughter, sprang up from her chair before either Jason or I had a chance to move. She returned quickly, her face pale and confused. "Dad, there's a police officer at the door. He wants to talk to you." A wave of fear washed over me, but I tried to maintain my composure for my children's sake. At the door stood a New York State trooper, his face professionally neutral. "Mr. Anderson? Mike Anderson?" "Yes, that's me. Are you the husband of Rachel Anderson?" When I nodded, the trooper glanced past me and my two kids and asked, "Could we speak privately, sir?" My throat tightened. "Jason, Katie, go to your rooms. I need to speak with the officer alone." They started to protest, but something in my voice made them hurry away. Once they were gone, the officer's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife's plane is missing and presumed down. It disappeared from radar tonight approximately halfway between Boston Logan Airport and Miami. A Coast Guard cutter is currently searching the area for survivors." The facts were simple enough. Rachel, a regional VP for Global Tech Industries, was headed to their Miami office with the company's CFO. She was an experienced pilot, so I hadn't worried when she told me about her flight plans. Now I was terrified. My worst nightmare had come true. My wife's plane had gone down at night in the shark-infested waters of the Atlantic. The officer shared a few more details that did nothing to comfort me before leaving, promising the Coast Guard would call with updates in the morning or sooner if there was any news. As soon as the door closed, Jason and Katie ran to me, fear etched on their faces, asking questions I couldn't answer. I knew they had been listening. I would have done the same at their age. The three of us clung to each other, trying to say encouraging things. Katie started to cry, and though Jason tried to act tough, I could see his eyes were red too. I did my best to stay composed for their sake, but inside I was frantic. We didn't think about cleaning up or homework. We just stayed close together for the rest of the evening. As it got later and still no phone call came, we all ended up in the master bedroom. The kids slept with me for the first time since they were little and scared of thunderstorms. We were attempting to eat breakfast the next morning when a call came from the Coast Guard. The faint hope sparked by the ring was quickly extinguished when the officer informed me that the cutter searching the area had found nothing. I contacted the principal at both schools to explain why Jason and Katie would be absent. When I went to check on them, I found them glued to the television, watching a report about the missing plane on CNN. I couldn't decide whether to let them keep watching or turn it off, but before I could ache on my mind, the phone rang again. From that moment on, every time I hung up one call, another came in. The first calls were from Rachel's parents and my own, all of them frantic with worry while trying to maintain a false sense of optimism that she would be found. I promised to call them back immediately with any news. Then came the calls from our friends and Rachel's colleagues, all wanting to help but not knowing how. The conversations were brief and awkward. Most challenging were the calls from the media. I should have anticipated those, but I was caught off guard when the first reporter called. I ended up talking to the reporter from the Times much longer than I wanted to. As more media outlets began calling, I started screening all calls, returning only those from people I cared about. During this time, neighbors and friends began dropping by with condolences and food. Initially, their generosity was welcome because I had no energy for cooking, but soon we had more food than we could possibly eat in a week. It was a long-standing tradition to express concern and sympathy with food, but while I appreciated the gesture, each casserole was a bitter reminder that my wife of 16 years was almost certainly dead. The next few days were awful. We became virtual prisoners in our own home, driven by our desire to avoid others and our hope for news from the Coast Guard. I made daily calls to their office in Boston for updates, but the reports were always negative. Then, 5 days after the trooper had come to our door, came the news we had been dreading. A Coast Guard officer called to tell me that wreckage from Rachel's plane had been found. There were no signs of any survivors. I'm sorry, sir, the officer concluded, but we're going to have to suspend search and rescue operations at this time. I wanted nothing more than to hide away and mourn alone, but that wasn't an option. Instead, I faced a seemingly endless list of painful responsibilities. The worst was having to tell Jason and Katie the devastating news and trying to console them. After they finally calmed down, I had to call relatives and close friends to inform them. Then I contacted our church to arrange a memorial service and the newspaper to submit an obituary. This was followed by more calls to share the time and date of the service. By the time I was done, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. Somehow we made it through the service and began the slow, painful process of trying to resume a normal life. The following week, the kids returned to school, and getting back into their routine seemed to help a little. I was not so fortunate. A new set of responsibilities fell on my shoulders. At the urging of a friend, I contacted an attorney to find out what my legal obligations were. I was shocked to learn that I would have to petition for a death certificate. But her plane crashed at sea. I protested. How can there be any doubt? I understand, the attorney said sympathetically. But without a body and a physician's certificate, the court has to make a formal declaration. Am I going to have to wait years? I asked, feeling distressed. No, the attorney reassured me. In cases like this, where someone has been lost at sea, there's usually no significant delay. You may have to answer some questions, but typically such cases are resolved quickly. I can get the petition started for you, he continued. I can also help you get all your other documents changed. Seeing my confusion, the attorney elaborated. Like any joint bank accounts, your mortgage, insurance, car titles, your will, anything like that. Meanwhile, you need to contact your wife's company to see about any benefits you may be entitled to. I shook my head wearily. In my grief, I hadn't considered just how complicated it would be to untangle the life Rachel and I had shared. Now I faced another daunting task. Calling on the widow of Tom Wilson, the financial executive who had been on the plane with Rachel. I'd met Linda only a couple of times at company functions, but I had taken an immediate dislike to her husband. He struck me as one of those arrogant types who believed he was smarter than everyone else. In the short time I spent with him, he managed to drop enough names and boast about his accomplishments to leave a bad taste in my mouth. But that wasn't Linda's fault, and I felt I had a duty to call on her. I phoned ahead, so Linda was expecting me. As we exchanged condolences, I realized she was probably the only one who truly knew how I was feeling. When we were seated in her living room, she asked kindly, "So how are you holding up now, Mike?" "It's hard, Linda. It's really hard. I just can't accept that she's really gone. So many things keep reminding me of her." I shook my head helplessly. You know what the hardest thing is? When I'm out on the street or in a crowd, I keep thinking that I've spotted her. The other day, I must have scared some poor woman half to death when I chased her down because I thought she was Rachel. I looked at the floor, recalling my emotions when I realized what I was doing. Linda watched me with sympathetic eyes. She knew there weren't any words that could help. Finally, I looked up at her and asked, "How about you, Linda? How are you coping?" "It's not easy, Mike, but I'm managing," she told me. "The truth is, I'm probably doing better than you. Tom and I didn't have any children. I don't have two to console like you do." She hesitated. "Also, and I wouldn't tell this to anyone else, Tom and I weren't getting along very well before all this happened. I caught him having a couple of affairs in the past, and I think he was in the middle of another one. If this hadn't happened, we'd probably be headed for divorce before too long." "I'm so sorry to hear that, Linda," I told her sympathetically. "I can only imagine the conflicting emotions you must be feeling." "Yes," she agreed. "One moment I'm relieved that I don't have to deal with this cheating anymore, and the next I'm filled with guilt because I don't feel sadder. And despite everything, There's a part of me that still misses him. Are you going to be okay financially? I asked, trying to change the subject. I'm not sure, she admitted. The good news is that the company provided life insurance on Tom. And because he died while on business with the double indemnity clause, I'll receive twice the face value. The bad news is that I'm going to need every penny because I've learned Tom made a series of bad investments in the futures market and severely depleted our net worth. What Linda said about her late husband did not surprise me. It took no stretch of the imagination to believe that an egotist like Tom Wilson would not prove a faithful husband. For that matter, the idea that Wilson would fancy himself a wheeler-dealer in the market was entirely in keeping with my mental picture of the man. What grabbed my attention was Linda's mention of the company-paid life insurance. I remember my attorney's advice and made a mental note to contact the benefits department of Global Tech right away. If Wilson had been covered, surely Rachel would have had a similar policy. Until I could find a job, those funds might come in very handy. After chatting a few minutes longer, I arose from the couch. Linda, please forgive me, but I'm going to have to cut my visit short. Jason and Katie will be getting out of school soon, and I got to go pick them up. But please stay in touch, and if there's anything I could do to help, even if you just need a sympathetic ear to bend, please don't hesitate to call me. When I drove up to our home after picking up Jason and Katie, I was surprised to see a car parked out front. I got my children into the house through the garage, and a minute later, the doorbell rang. Outside were a man who looked to be in his 50s and a younger woman, both dressed in business attire. I'm Special Agent Harold Barnes. The man introduced himself. And this is Special Agent Jessica Cooper. We're with the FBI. We'd like to come in and ask you a few questions in conjunction with your wife's disappearance. When she realized they were law enforcement officers, Katie wrapped her arms around my waist and buried her face in my side. I could feel her tears dampening my shirt, and I held her tightly. What's this about? I demanded angrily. Before the first agent could speak, Agent Cooper interceded. I'm so sorry we've upset your daughter, Mr. Anderson. All we're trying to do is complete a routine check in connection with your petition for a death certificate for Mrs. Anderson. If you'd like us to come back later, we'll try to do so at a time that would be better for you. I ignored her and turned to face my daughter. It's all right, honey. No. Thing bad has happened. The female agent bent down on one knee, reached in her purse, pulled out a tissue, and handed it to Katie. Here, sweetie, she said in a gentle voice. Katie hesitated, then shyly accepted the tissue, wiping her eyes and blowing her nose. When I saw that my daughter had calmed down, I put my arm around her and spoke to her. These people need to talk with me a while about your mom, Katie. Why don't you go get started on your homework? I'll be right out here in the living room if you need me. With that, I gently nudged Katie toward her room, then turned to face the officers. If it won't take too long, let's get this over with. The three of us moved into the living room and sat around the coffee table. We just need to gather some background information on your wife, Mr. Anderson, the male agent began. How long were the two of you married? We got married in 2008, right after we both graduated from Penn State. I replied, thinking back to the beautiful brunette co-ed I had wooed and won so many years ago. And she was employed by Global Tech Industries up until her disappearance? That's right, I confirmed. She was sales vice president for the Northeastern U.S. If her region was the Northeast, why would she have been traveling to Miami? The younger woman asked. At Global Tech, I explained, the Northeast Territory includes Florida as well as the U.S. Their Southeast Asian headquarters are in Miami, so it wasn't uncommon for Rachel to fly down there. Rachel? Agent Cooper asked softly. I felt my voice grow husky. That was my pet name for her. Agent Cooper reached across and patted my hand sympathetically. That's all right, Mr. Anderson. I know this is hard for you. The older agent decided to change the line of questioning. Was it normal for your wife to fly her own plane on business trips? Yes, I replied. Rachel's dad was a pilot, and she got her license as soon as she was old enough. She took every opportunity to fly herself because she said it made her independent of commercial airline schedules. She used to say she could get where she needed to be, complete her business, and be back home while the competition was still stuck in the terminal. She felt like it gave her an edge, especially when she was starting out. The two agents made notes. Then Agent Cooper looked up at me. "And what about you, Mr. Anderson? What do you do?" I managed a small smile. "I'm a stay-at-home dad." Seeing their looks, I continued. "I was an aerospace engineer up until 2 years ago when my company downsized and I was laid off. The only prospects I could find would have required us to relocate out of state. But Rachel's job was going great. She'd gotten a couple of major promotions and was earning a great salary plus big bonuses. It didn't make sense for her to quit. So we agreed that I'd manage the household and take care of the kids while he worked. And how did this change affect your relationship with Mrs. Anderson?" Agent Barnes asked. "Why is that relevant?" I asked irritably. "Please bear with us, Mr. Anderson," the younger woman interceded. "We are required to check to see if there could be any factors that might have played a role in your wife's disappearance. It's all routine." Somewhat mollified, I looked at the two of them. Of course, it was a big change for me, but I'm an engineer. I trained to measure and assess all the factors in a design. It was easy to see that my changing roles was the right thing for our family at that time. It made it possible for Rachel to devote herself to her career, and I made sure that Jason and Katie always had a parent there for them. Neither of the agents said anything, and I felt the question still hanging in the air. "I don't mean it was easy," I continued. "She was always meeting with clients or attending corporate meetings, so I didn't see as much of her as I wanted. Sometimes it felt like her job came first." Realizing how that sounded, I quickly added, "But that's just how corporate life is. Besides, it worked out well until now." "Just two more questions, Mr. Anderson," Agent Barnes said, jotting down notes. "Did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior before her disappearance?" "Not really," I replied after a moment. "I know she was under a lot of pressure in the last year or so, and her travel schedule was heavier than ever. But Rachel said she was in line for a major promotion. When she got it, she promised the new job would cut down on her travel and come with a high-level title and a big salary bump." "Last question," Agent Barnes said, still writing. "Are you aware of any changes in your finances that your wife might have made in the last few months?" "No," I replied confidently. "I keep up with all our finances, and I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary." The young woman glanced at her partner. "I think we've taken enough of your time, Mr. Anderson. We should be able to wrap this up quickly, and we'll let you know as soon as we've concluded. In the meantime, if you think of anything you feel we should know, please call me at this number." She handed me her card, and the two agents headed for the door. I went back to my kids' rooms to make sure they were getting their homework done. Both looked busy when I peeked in. They're strong kids, I thought. They've been through hell, and they're holding up well, all things considered. The next day, I drove to Global Tech headquarters to visit the benefits department. The head of the department met me and, after expressing her condolences, handed over a box filled with Rachel's personal effects from her office. I had to swallow hard when I saw the framed family portrait she had kept on her desk. The director then introduced me to a specialist to advise me on Rachel's benefits. The first order of business. S was to look at Rachel's 401k account. I had regularly seen her annual statements, so I wasn't expecting any surprises. When I saw the final total, however, it was quite a bit higher than I had anticipated. Apparently, during the last year, Rachel had increased her contributions to the plan, putting in more than the company would match. She was really trying to provide for her family, the specialist commented with admiration. The specialist advised me to withdraw the funds as soon as possible and roll them over into my own IRA to more easily manage them. The other surprise was the sheet outlining the life insurance benefit I would receive as Rachel's beneficiary. I learned that Rachel had opted for the maximum amount of insurance she was eligible for with the accidental death multiplier. I was amazed to realize that I would receive almost 4 years' worth of Rachel's income. The insurance company will pay that out in annual installments, the woman explained. Otherwise, the taxes would eat you alive. The payment of all the benefits, of course, was contingent on the company receiving a copy of Rachel's death certificate. But after the visit from the two agents, I felt confident that would be forthcoming soon. I left the office, building much relieved. I had thought I would have to begin an immediate search for another job. Now I realized I had a significant grace period to get my life together. Thank you, Rachel, I whispered fervently. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Jason's homeroom teacher. I'd like to meet with you to talk about your son, the teacher told me. He's having some discipline problems in school. I agreed to meet with her the next day, but I decided not to say anything to Jason that night. I wanted to wait until I learned what was happening before confronting my son. Mrs. Walsh, the homeroom teacher, told me that Jason's behavior in class had grown worse over the last few months. I didn't want to say anything at first because I know he's been through so much, the teacher explained. But it seems to be getting worse. He's become increasingly disengaged from his classes. He's not doing his homework, and his other teachers tell me he's not paying attention in their classes. He's always done so well up to now, but his grades are really going to plummet this semester if he doesn't do something to turn things around. I was troubled. How much do you think being a teenager has to do with this? There's no question that's a tough age for kids, especially boys, she told me. But we're used to that. I think his mother's death is affecting him more than he may have let on to you. You may want to consider getting counseling for him. I thanked the woman and returned to my car to wait uneasily for my kids to finish their gym classes. When I got Jason and Katie home, I sent Katie to her room to get started on her homework, then led Jason into the master bedroom. The boy's Ace darkened. He knew he was in trouble. I recounted my visit with Jason's homeroom teacher and cited some of the examples she had given me. Jason, what's going on? I asked gently. Your teachers say you're not paying attention in class and you're not doing your homework. This isn't like you. He looked down at the floor, avoiding my eyes. I don't know, Dad. I just can't focus. Everything feels different now. I know it's been hard since we lost your mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But your schoolwork is important. Is there something specific bothering you? His face contorted with sudden anger. Who cares? He shouted. She was such a lying bitch anyway. In shock and anger, I grabbed my son's arm. Don't you ever speak of your mother that way. How can you say such a thing? In fear of my rage and pain at my strong grip, the boy blurted out, I saw her. I saw her screwing that man. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he slumped to the bed and began to sob. In astonishment, I sat down beside him, put my arm around him, and held him as though he were a small child. It's all right, I kept repeating, trying to calm his obvious anguish. When Jason's crying had subsided, I lifted his head. It's all right, Jason. I'm not mad at you. Just tell me what you saw. My son looked at me tearfully. It was last fall. You let me ride my bike to school one day, but I forgot my math homework, so I sneaked out at lunch to come home and get it. While I was looking for it in my room, I heard Mom come in. I didn't want her to catch me, so I hid. That's when I heard the man's voice. What man? I asked a little too quickly. I don't know, Jason said. Some guy I never saw before. That's okay. I soothed him. Just tell me what happened next. They came in here, and then it got quiet, so I thought I could sneak out. But then I heard Mom make a funny sound, and I was scared, and I looked in, and they were on the bed, and they were... The words poured out of his mouth faster and faster, as though he were desperate to spit them out. When he finished, he began to cry again. Why did she do that, Dad? How could Mom act like such a... As I listened to my son's story, I felt myself go numb, but I had no time to deal with my own emotions. My son needed me. I understand, Jason. It's okay. I'm sorry you had to see that, but I'm glad you told me. I took my son gently by the shoulders and turned him around to face me. Sometimes people we love make mistakes or do something we don't like. That doesn't mean we don't love them anymore. It just means we don't like what they did. I don't know why your mother would do that, son, but I know she loved you and Katie very much. It's the good things she did that I want you to remember about her. I held my son and continued to talk to him for a while longer. When I felt that the boy had calmed down sufficiently, I gently urged him to start on his homework while I went off to the kitchen to get dinner started. Before Jason left, I enjoined him to say nothing to Katie. The boy promised, and I felt fairly comfortable that he would keep the disturbing news from his sister. The rest of the evening passed without further incident, but once the kids were in bed, my emotions began to erupt. My first reaction was to deny what Jason had told me. My son had to be mistaken or have misinterpreted what he saw, but I couldn't maintain that rationalization for long. My son had been too upset by the experience, and I had to admit a teenager these days would certainly recognize sex when he saw it. With that admission, my thoughts turned bitter. How could Rachel have betrayed me? I had thought we had a good marriage. How could she have been sleeping with someone on the side? For that matter, who was the other man, and how long had the affair lasted? It's hard enough to lose your wife in a plane crash, I thought in despair. It's worse to learn you lost her long before that. Sleep was slow in coming that night, and the next day I was in a black mood. It was Tuesday, a day I would normally go to the gym, and after the kids were off to school, I decided to keep the routine. The exercise helped divert my attention, but when I hit the treadmill, my mind returned to Rachel's infidelity. How could Rachel have done that? And in our own bed? I asked myself. Somehow the location made the betrayal even worse. For that matter, how could she know I wouldn't be home? The answer hit me immediately. It must have been one of the days when I went to the gym. I'm such a creature of habit. She would have been pretty certain the house would be empty. But the answer to that question immediately raised others. If she planned her little assignation to fit my schedule, that doesn't sound like it was a spur-of-the-moment thing. How often did she meet him there? It couldn't have been every week. Her travel schedule would have interfered. Every question seemed to raise another, each only adding to my anguish. I did my best to act normally around Jason and Katie, but over the next few days, I continued to suffer. I found myself making a trip to the drugstore to buy antacids. I'd never had stomach problems before. Compounding my misery was the lack of anyone to talk to about my discovery. I certainly didn't want to involve our parents. I knew the news would be devastating to them. Likewise, I didn't want to talk to my friends and risk becoming the subject of gossip in the neighborhood. And I definitely didn't want to risk having any of his schoolmates teasing Jason or Katie. I felt trapped. I was working at my desk one evening when I noticed Jessica Cooper's card. She had told me to call her if I had any additional information. In truth, I was desperate for any excuse to share my news with someone and get another perspective. I called the cell phone number she had handed. 10 on the card. When I identified myself, Jessica seemed pleased to hear from me, but her tone changed to one of concern when I told her I needed to talk. Are Jason and Katie okay? She asked anxiously. They are, but I'm not, I replied. Could you possibly have lunch with me tomorrow? This isn't the kind of thing I want to discuss over the phone. She quickly agreed and suggested a place near the FBI offices where she worked. It's a quiet little place. We should be able to talk, she assured me. When I hung up, I found myself feeling a bit better at the prospect of unburdening myself. Jessica was waiting in the restaurant when I came through the door. She smiled in greeting, but her smile quickly disappeared when she saw the pained expression on my face. After we were seated and had placed our orders, she could stand the suspense no longer. For heaven's sake, Mike, what's happened? You told me to let you know if I had any more information about my wife, I said. Well, I don't know if this is relevant to your investigation, but I just found out that Rachel was cheating on me. As I said that, I was ashamed to feel tears flood my eyes and run down my cheeks. Jessica reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Oh, Mike, that's horrible. Tell me what happened. The whole story of the meeting with Jason's teacher, the confrontation with my son, and Jason's anguished revelation came spilling out, interrupted only by the arrival of our food. Jessica listened quietly, letting me tell the story at my own pace. Only when I'd reached the end did she speak. Poor Jason, she said. It's no surprise he's been acting out in school. This must have been eating away at him ever since it happened. And then with her death, it's no wonder he's been so conflicted. She released my hands when the waitress brought our order, but now she leaned across the table to reach for me again. I can hardly imagine what this has done to you, Mike, she said quietly, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes. Was there any indication that something was wrong? Now that you look back, did you see any clues? No, I said. I can't say I saw anything. You know what they say, the husband is always the last to know. I looked down at my untouched plate for a second, then back up at her. Ever since she got her big promotion, our sex life had fallen off pretty sharply, but between the pressures of her new role and her travel schedule, I figured it was understandable. I didn't like it, but I felt like I had to accept it for our family's sake. She kept telling me things would get better once she moved up to the national level, but I paused. I guess that wasn't to be. Then I scowled. What's killing me is I don't have any answers. I don't know who the bastard she was sleeping with was. I don't know when their affair started or how long it had been going on. I don't know if she was in love with the guy or if she was planning to leave me. Worst of all, I don't know why she would do that to me and the kids. Jessica squeezed my hands. Mike, please listen to me. The truth is that you're not likely to ever get the answers to your questions. You're going to have to let all that go. With her death, none of that matters anymore. All you can do is focus on taking care of your family and yourself. I know you're right, I said, but it just hurts so bad to be betrayed that way. It makes me wonder when she stopped loving me. No, Jessica said fiercely. You're wrong. Whatever else may have happened, it's clear that Rachel still cared deeply about you and the kids. Look what you found out at Global Tech. She bought the maximum life insurance to make sure you all were protected. She maxed out her contributions to the 401k plan to put money away for your future. I don't know what else happened in her life, but those sure look like caring acts to me. Thanks, Jessica. I'll try to remember that. She gave my hands another squeeze and then let go, sitting back in her chair. It's going to be tough, Mike, but you're strong. You can get through this. I nodded, feeling a bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. I hope so. I really do. I need to be strong for Jason and Katie. They deserve at least that much from me. You'll be strong for them and for yourself, Jessica said with conviction. And if you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me. Thanks, Jessica. Your support means a lot. She smiled, a warm and reassuring gesture. Anytime, Mike. Anytime. As we finished our meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for a moment, I felt a sense of normalcy return. Jessica's presence was a balm for my troubled mind, and her words gave me the resolve to face whatever came next. That evening, I was checking my email when I noticed something odd. I had set up Facebook accounts for both my kids and insisted they friend me so I could monitor their online activity. As I logged into my account, I noticed a friend request from someone named David White. The name didn't sound familiar, and there was no picture, only a silhouette. When I clicked on the name, the stranger's page blandly informed me that personal information was available only to friends. Hey, Jason, I called out. Do we know a David White? My son walked into the room and saw that I was looking at Facebook. Oh, that guy? Just ignore him, Dad. He's been bugging me to friend him for weeks now. I just delete his requests. Katie popped into the room just then. Yeah, he's been trying to get me to friend him too. He's just some Facebook creep. That was enough to catch my attention. Some unknown person was not only trying to make contact with me, but also with my children. There were all kinds of scam artists out there, I knew, and a few far worse predators as well. I was alarmed, but I didn't want to frighten my children. You two did exactly the right thing, was all I said. Don't ever respond to anyone you don't know online. Grasping for ways to protect my family, I had a sudden idea. I wondered if Jessica could help us find out who this white person was. I called her at home, and she must have seen my name on caller ID because she answered warmly. Hi, Mike. Hi, Jessica. I'm glad I caught you. Is there any chance you could come over? Something odd has come up, and I'd like to check it out with you if you're free. It's nothing serious, is it? Jason and Katie are okay? As I reassured her, I couldn't help but observe that she seemed as concerned about my children as I was. It gave me a warm feeling. She told me she'd be over in 30 minutes. Once she arrived, I showed her the Facebook requests. Her face grew serious as she examined them. Mike, this isn't a typical spam account or marketing bot. This looks like someone is making a concerted effort to get information about your family. She made a few calls and then turned to me with a grim expression. The account was created from an IP address in Miami. That can't be a coincidence. A chill ran down my spine as I connected the dots. Miami, where Rachel was supposedly flying to. You think this might be connected to Rachel's disappearance? I asked. Jessica nodded slowly. There's something else you should know. We've been investigating Tom Wilson's finances. He had been embezzling money from global tech through a sophisticated invoicing scheme. Millions of dollars are missing, and we think Rachel might have discovered it. My mind was racing. You think Wilson killed her to keep her quiet? That's one possibility, Jessica said carefully. But there's another scenario we're considering. She hesitated. Mike, we need to consider the possibility that Rachel might be alive. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Think about it, Jessica said gently. The increased life insurance, the maxed out 401k, the careful planning of the flight. All of that could be seen as preparation, not protection. I sat down heavily. You think she helped Wilson fake their deaths? It's just a theory, but it would explain a lot, including why someone in Miami is trying to gather information about your family. The next few days were a blur as Jessica and her team put together an operation. Using my children's Facebook accounts as bait, they set a trap. When a hit came from a high-end Miami restaurant where someone had accessed Katie's page, Jessica's team was ready. I insisted on being there, despite Jessica's protests. We sat in an unmarked car outside the restaurant, watching the patrons come and go. Then I saw her. The blonde hair was different, cut short and styled differently, but I would know that walk anywhere. It was Rachel. Before Jessica could stop me, I was out of the car and following her. She led me to a luxury condo complex near the beach. As she fumbled for her keys at the door, I spoke. Hello, Rachel. She whirled around, her face going pale. Mike, what how? Before she could say more, Tom Wilson appeared in the doorway behind her, a gun in his hand. Get inside, he snarled at me. But before I could move, Jessica's voice rang out. FBI, drop the weapon. She and a dozen agents seemed to materialize from nowhere, weapons drawn. Wilson tried to slam the door, but it was too late. Within minutes, both he and Rachel were in handcuffs. The truth came out quickly after that. Wilson had been embezzling for years. Rachel had discovered his scheme, but instead of reporting it, she'd made a deal with him. She would help him fake their deaths and escape with the money. And in return, she'd get a new life away from what she called her suffocating suburban existence. She hadn't counted on her son witnessing her affair with Wilson, or on me refusing to let go of the mystery. 2 months later, I sat in the courtroom as Rachel was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I didn't look at her as they led her away. Instead, I looked at Jessica, who sat beside me, holding my hand. She had been my rock through all of this, helping me understand that Rachel's betrayal said more about her own character than any failing on my part. 6 months later, I sold our house in New York. The memories were too painful, and the kids needed a fresh start. Jessica had taken a position with the FBI's Seattle field office, and when she asked if we'd consider moving with her, it felt right. Now, standing on our deck overlooking Puget Sound, watching Jason and Katie laugh as they helped Jessica prepare dinner, I know we made the right choice. Sometimes life's worst betrayals can lead us to our greatest blessings. I still don't have all the answers about why Rachel did what she did, but I've learned that sometimes not having answers is better than living a lie. And sometimes real love isn't about grand gestures or big promises. It's about being there day after day, helping a teenage boy with his homework, holding a little girl when she cries, and loving them both enough to help them heal. Jessica understood that from the start, and that's worth more than all the answers in the world.